My parents called a family meeting. "You owe us for raising you," Dad said, handing me a bill. I thought it was a joke. Then Mom added, "Be grateful we're only charging you this much." So I pulled out my own invoice, and when they saw the total, their faces went pale. That wasn't even the worst part. I'm 31M, and if I had to describe my relationship with my parents in one word, it would be transactional. Not in the sense that they expected me to do chores or be responsible. Most parents want that. But growing up, I learned pretty quickly that nothing in my family was ever given freely. Everything came with a price. I was never the type to ask for much. I knew better. If I wanted something, I either had to earn it or prove, beyond any doubt, why I deserved it. I had to be useful. I had to be worth the investment. My younger brother, George, 29M, never had that problem. I don't think it started as blatant favoritism. At least, I don't think my parents saw it that way. But little things added up. If I wanted a new pair of shoes, I had to save up my birthday money or get straight A's. When George wanted new shoes, Mom just bought them. If I asked why, the answer was always something like, "Well, he needs them for soccer," or "You're more responsible with money, you can wait." That logic followed me into my teenage years. At first, I told myself I didn't mind. I liked being independent. I liked knowing I could take care of myself. But the older I got, the more I realized it wasn't about independence at all. It was about expectations. My parents expected me to manage on my own. They expected me to struggle a little. George? He was fragile. He needed help. It wasn't just about money. It was about the way we were treated. When George forgot about an assignment and failed a test, Mom comforted him and said, "It happens to everyone." When I missed a homework deadline, once, Dad said I was being careless and needed to grow up. When George got caught drinking at 17, Dad laughed and said, "Boys will be boys." When I came home 5 minutes past curfew, I got grounded for 2 weeks. I kept my mouth shut. Complaining wouldn't change anything. But I'll never forget my 16th birthday. I had been working part-time for almost a year, saving up for a car. I knew my parents weren't going to buy me one, so I was prepared to handle it myself. But a tiny part of me still hoped they might help out, at least a little. Maybe match whatever I had saved. Maybe surprise me with an old used car. Then, a week before my birthday, George turned 14. And my parents, who had never so much as offered to pitch in for my car, got him a brand new gaming console. I shouldn't have been surprised, but I was. I didn't say anything, but my dad must have noticed my face because he said, "We'll see about getting you a car in a couple of years, once you've proven you can handle the responsibility." That was the moment I knew. They were never going to help. They didn't see me the same way they saw George. So I stopped expecting anything from them. I worked, saved up, and bought my own used car at 17. I put myself through college. I moved out as soon as I could. Meanwhile, George coasted. He dropped out of college twice. He quit jobs after a few months. And whenever he ran into trouble, Mom and Dad swooped in with money, excuses, and second chances. I never asked for a dime. Even when I was struggling, even when I could have used the help, I kept my distance. I should have cut them off entirely. But part of me, the stupid part, thought maybe things would change now that I was an adult. Maybe they'd finally respect me. Then, last week, I got a text from my dad. "Family meeting. Be here Sunday at 3 p.m. Don't be late." I almost ignored it. I wasn't a kid anymore. I didn't live under their roof. But I was curious. We hadn't had a family meeting in over a decade. So, I went. When I arrived, the first thing I noticed was George, slouched on the couch, looking bored. He barely glanced up when I walked in. Mom and Dad sat at the kitchen table, their expressions serious. Something felt off. "Sit down," Dad said. I sat. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Mom reached into a folder and slid a piece of paper across the table toward me. I picked it up, expecting. Honestly, I don't know what I was expecting. But when I read what was on that paper, I felt my stomach drop. It was an invoice. A long, itemized bill. And they were completely serious. At first, I thought I had read it wrong. The numbers didn't make sense. The words on the page blurred together: room and board, groceries, utilities, medical expenses, even gas money for the rides they had given me when I was a teenager. The total at the bottom? $79,850. I let out a short laugh, not because it was funny, but because I genuinely thought this had to be some kind of bizarre joke. "You're kidding," I said, setting the paper down. Neither of them laughed. "We're not," Dad said. His tone was calm, almost patient, like he was explaining something obvious to a child. "Raising a kid is expensive. We gave you a roof over your head, food, and education. Now that you're successful, it's time you start giving back." I stared at him, trying to process what I was hearing. Mom chimed in, her voice softer but just as firm. "And be grateful we're only charging you this much. If we added in everything, the total would be a lot higher." I looked at George, half expecting him to crack a joke or roll his eyes. Instead, he just shrugged, like this was completely normal. I shook my head. "You're serious." Dad exhaled through his nose, clearly losing patience. "You're doing well for yourself. You have your own business, a good life. Meanwhile, we've spent decades supporting you. The least you can do is help out now that you're in a position to." I felt something hot and bitter rise in my throat. "You didn't support me," I said slowly. "I worked. I paid my own way through school. I moved out the second I could. I have never once asked you for money." Dad's expression darkened. "And that's why we knew you'd be able to handle this." That's when it clicked. They didn't think they were asking for this money. They genuinely believed I owed them, that I was some kind of investment they were finally cashing in on. I glanced down at the invoice again, scanning through the itemized list. Some of it was absurd: general parenting costs $20,000, but what really got me was a line near the bottom: loan to cover family emergencies, $15,000. I frowned. "What is this?" I pointed at the line item. Mom shifted in her seat. "That was when we needed money a few years ago. You covered some of the mortgage payments, remember?" I remembered. They had called me out of the blue, panicked. Said they were in a tough spot, that they just needed a little help. I had wired them the money that same day, no hesitation. "It wasn't a loan," I said. "I gave you that money. I never asked for it back." Dad waved a hand dismissively. "Well, that just goes to show you had plenty to spare." I felt my fingers tighten around the edges of the paper. "So let me get this straight," I said, my voice low. "I'm supposed to pay you back for things every parent is legally and morally supposed to provide for their child?" Mom sighed like I was being dramatic. "You don't understand, honey. It's not about the money, it's about appreciation. We worked hard to give you a good life, and this is just a way for you to show that you value everything we've done for you." I almost laughed again, but there was no humor in it. Appreciation? For what? The years of being treated like a financial burden while George got everything handed to him? The constant reminders that I had to earn what he got for free? I had spent my entire life trying to prove I was worth as much as him. And now, sitting in that kitchen, staring at that ridiculous invoice, I finally accepted the truth. I never would be. I took a slow breath and slid the paper back across the table. "No," Dad's jaw clenched. "Excuse me." "No," I repeated, standing up. "I'm not paying you." Mom's expression turned tight. "We are your parents. We spent years providing for you. This is the least you can do." "The least I can do?" I let out a dry chuckle. "I was a kid. You chose to have me. You don't get to send me a bill for existing." Mom's mouth opened and closed, her face turning red. Dad, however, just sat back, watching me like I was some ungrateful disappointment. "We always knew you were selfish," he muttered. Something in me snapped. Selfish? Me? I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and scrolled for a moment. Then I turned the screen toward them. Their eyes flickered to it. "What's this?" Mom asked. I smiled coldly. My own invoice. It was something I had put together a long time ago, not because I ever planned to use it, but because I wanted to see in black and white just how much they had taken from me over the years. Money I had lent them. The $15,000 for the mortgage. The savings account they had drained to help George get on his feet. The inheritance from my grandfather that had mysteriously vanished before I could see a dime. The total? Let's just say it made their bill look like pocket change. Mom's face went pale. Dad's hands tightened into fists. Mom's eyes darted over the numbers on my phone screen, her lips pressing into a thin line. Dad, on the other hand, barely glanced at it before shaking his head. "This is different," he said, voice clipped. I raised an eyebrow. "How?" Mom shifted uncomfortably. "Because," she said, grasping for words, "we're your parents. The money we took from you was to support the family. You weren't struggling. You had more than enough." I let out a sharp breath through my nose. "So, let me get this straight. When you spend money on me, things that every parent is supposed to provide, it's a debt I have to repay. But when I give you money, without ever asking for it back, it's just gone." Dad's expression darkened. "Watch your tone." I ignored him. "I was 18 when you took that inheritance. You told me Grandpa hadn't left me anything, but I found out later he had. Where did that money go?" Mom flinched. She opened her mouth like she wanted to deny it, but she must have known that wouldn't work. Instead, she turned to Dad. He exhaled sharply, rubbing his temple. It went toward the house. "Mortgage payments, maintenance, things you benefited from." "Benefited?" I repeated, letting out a humorless chuckle. "I moved out at 19. I didn't see a cent of that money, but you're telling me I benefited from it." Neither of them answered. George, who had been sitting quietly the whole time, finally spoke up. "Why are you being so difficult about this?" he said, his voice carrying that usual air of irritation, like I was overreacting. "It's not like you're broke." I turned to look at him, really look at him. He was lounging in his chair, arms crossed, wearing a hoodie that I knew for a fact Mom had bought for him. He still lived at home. He still drove a car my parents had paid for. He still got handouts from them whenever he needed. Of course, he didn't see the problem. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "This isn't about the money, George. It's about the fact that they think they're owed something for doing the bare minimum as parents." "Bare minimum?" Mom repeated, looking genuinely offended. "We gave you everything. We worked hard to make sure you had a roof over your head, food, clothes." I held up a hand. "Stop right there. Do you hear yourself? You're listing off basic parental responsibilities like they were some kind of luxury. I never asked to be born. I never agreed to some contract where I had to pay you back for raising me." Dad's jaw tightened. "You act like we're just strangers to you." I leveled him with a look. "Aren't you? Because a real parent wouldn't be sitting here trying to shake their kid down for money." Mom's face flushed, and for the first time, she actually looked hurt. Not guilty, not regretful. Hurt. Like I was the one betraying them. "You've changed," she said, shaking her head. "Ever since you moved out, you've acted like you're too good for this family." I felt a flicker of something, maybe sadness, maybe frustration, but I pushed it down. "I didn't change," I said. "I just stopped pretending this dynamic was normal." Dad leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. His expression had shifted into something colder, more businesslike. "Look," he said, "you don't want to pay the whole thing? Fine. We can negotiate." I blinked. "Negotiate?" He nodded. "I'm willing to lower the total if you at least contribute something." I stared at him, trying to figure out if he actually thought this was reasonable or if he was just testing me, pushing to see how much he could get. And that's when I realized something else. They didn't expect me to fight back. They had assumed I'd just pay, either out of guilt or because I didn't want to cause a scene. Maybe they thought I was still that kid who kept his head down, who worked quietly while George got all the praise. But I wasn't that kid anymore. I took a deep breath, straightened up, and met my father's gaze head on. "I'm not negotiating," I said. "I'm not paying a single cent." Dad's expression darkened. Mom looked like she was about to cry. George muttered something under his breath, but I didn't care enough to ask what. I grabbed my phone off the table and stood up. "This conversation is over." And then I turned and walked toward the door. I expected them to let me leave. Maybe yell after me. Maybe guilt trip me some more, but ultimately let me go. But just as I reached for the doorknob, Dad's voice stopped me in my tracks. "If you walk out that door," he said, his tone low and warning, "then you're cutting yourself off from this family." I hesitated, not because I was reconsidering, but because I realized how familiar this moment felt. This was how they had always controlled me, by making me feel like I had to earn my place in the family, by making me believe that if I didn't play by their rules, I wouldn't belong. But the truth was, I had already been on my own for years. I turned my head slightly, just enough to glance over my shoulder. I think we both know that already happened a long time ago. And with that, I stepped outside, letting the door click shut behind me. I sat in my car for a few minutes, just staring at my phone. The screen lit up with a call from Mom, then a text from Dad. I didn't answer. I wasn't sure what they expected me to do. Turn back around? Apologize? Hand over a check like none of this was completely insane? Instead, I tossed my phone onto the passenger seat and started the engine. I had barely pulled out of the driveway when another text came in. This time from George. You're being ridiculous. Just pay them something and move on. I scoffed, tossing my phone face down. Of course he'd say that. Paying them off wouldn't change anything. If I gave them anything, it would just open the door for more demands later. And yet, despite everything, a small part of me still felt that old, familiar pull of guilt. That voice in the back of my mind whispering that maybe I was being too harsh. But then I reminded myself, they weren't asking for help. They were demanding payment. And they'd never expect the same from George. That alone was enough to silence the guilt. I drove home, the whole conversation replaying in my head. Every word, every look, every time Dad's expression shifted like he was still trying to figure out the best way to manipulate me. By the time I got to my apartment, I had made a decision. I wasn't just going to walk away from this. I was going to make sure they never tried something like this again. I pulled up my laptop and started going through old documents, bank transfers, old messages, even the paperwork from when my grandfather had passed. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. A direct deposit into my parents' account for $15,000 labeled as temporary help. A message from Mom a few days later. Thank you so much. We'll pay you back soon. Love you. And then, nothing. No follow-ups. No repayments. Just silence. I dug deeper, scrolling back through old bank statements. And that's when I saw it. The withdrawal from my savings account. The one I had spent years building up, only to have it wiped out in a single transaction. They had told me they were just borrowing it, that they needed it to help George get on his feet, that I'd get it back as soon as he was stable. That was 8 years ago. I leaned back in my chair, fingers drumming against the desk. They had taken thousands from me under the pretense of borrowing it. They had drained an inheritance that was meant for me. They had expected me to just accept it, to be grateful for whatever crumbs they decided to throw my way. And now, after all of that, they had the audacity to demand even more? My jaw tightened. Fine. If they wanted to play this game, I'd play. I wasn't going to demand my money back. I knew they wouldn't pay me even if I did. But I had something better. Leverage. I spent the next few hours pulling together everything: bank statements, messages, records of transactions. I organized them neatly into a folder on my desktop, labeled something simple but effective: family finances. Then, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my uncle. Uncle Ray was my mom's older brother. He and my parents didn't always see eye to eye, but he was the one person in the family I still somewhat trusted. More importantly, he had been the executor of my grandfather's estate. When he picked up, his voice was warm but cautious. Hey, kid. It's been a while. Hey, Uncle Ray, I said, forcing a smile into my voice. Listen, I have a quick question for you about Grandpa's will. There was a pause, then a sigh. I was wondering when you'd ask. My stomach tightened. So, you knew. Not everything, he admitted. But I knew your parents took the inheritance that was meant for you. Your grandfather set aside a significant amount for you and George. Equal amounts. But when I asked about it, your mom told me you'd agreed to let them manage your share. I let out a bitter laugh. Manage, huh? They emptied it. Spend it on themselves and George. That's low. Even for them, he said. I hesitated before asking my next question. Is there anything I can do? Another pause. Then, in a lower voice, he said, actually, yeah, there might be. Apparently, since the inheritance had been meant for me specifically, and I had never legally signed away my rights to it, I could pursue it. It wouldn't be easy. I'd have to get a lawyer involved. But the fact that I had documentation of them taking and spending the money without my knowledge, that could make a real case. I thanked Uncle Ray, hung up, and stared at my computer screen for a long time. I called a lawyer the next day, a friend of a friend, someone who had dealt with estate disputes before. I forwarded him all the documents I had and explained the situation. After going through everything, his response was simple. You have a case. It took a few weeks to get everything filed. In the meantime, I ignored my parents' calls. I ignored George's passive-aggressive texts. I let them sit in their own assumptions, probably thinking I had just moved on. Then the legal notice was served. That's when the real chaos started. Mom showed up at my apartment first, banging on the door, yelling, "How could you do this to your own family?" She shrieked the second I opened the door. I stayed calm. I'm just taking back what was mine. Dad came next, calling me in a controlled, low voice. You don't want to do this, he warned. But I did. Then George texted, You're actually insane. You're tearing this family apart over money. I didn't bother responding. Because here's the thing. I wasn't the one who had torn this family apart. They had. They were the ones who had stolen from me, lied to me, and then tried to extort me for more. All I had done was finally stand up for myself. And for the first time, they were facing real consequences. But they didn't have the money to pay me back. Instead, we settled in court. They had to sell off assets, including their precious vacation timeshare, to pay back a chunk of what they owed. And George? He was furious. Because for the first time, his life of comfort was affected. They tried to guilt me, of course. Tried to paint me as the villain. But the thing about manipulation is that it only works when you care what the other person thinks. And I didn't care anymore. So that's where things stand now. My parents lost a big chunk of what they had, and they're still bitter about it. They ended up downsizing their house, selling their vacation timeshare, and making other sacrifices to settle the case. According to Uncle Ray, they've been telling extended family that I sued them over a misunderstanding and ruined their lives over money. George isn't speaking to me. No surprise there. Last I heard, he was still complaining to anyone who'd listen about how unfair it is that I took things too far. Meanwhile, he still has everything he got from them, including the money they stole from me. He never offered to pay back a cent. As for me, I feel free. No more guilt, no more manipulation, no more wondering when the next demand would come. I finally stood up for myself. And even though it caused a huge family rift, I don't regret it. But I know this whole thing makes me look like the villain in their eyes. So now I have to ask, am I the a-hole for legally forcing my parents to pay me back? Was it too extreme, or was I justified in what I did? I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you've ever felt taken advantage of by family, share your story in the comments. Like and subscribe for more stories like this.